Your postgraduate work permit is expiring in 2026. Waiting for a nomination alone could cost your legal status in Canada. There is no extension, no safety net, no second chance if you wait too long to do this. Welcome back to My Canada Move. If you are in Manitoba and your post-graduation work permit is expiring in early to mid-2026, this video is extremely important for you, especially if you are waiting for a letter of advice to apply or you are waiting for your Manitoba provincial nomination. Now, there is a lot of confusion right now, so today I'm going to break it down clearly what options you really have to stay in Canada and to keep working legally. Now, it's important to note, immigration is layered. Policies change, individual circumstances matter. My goal is to make the information clear and bring awareness to what's happening so you are not operating in the dark. And from there, you can do further research, verify, and then make informed decisions. Now, here is the uncomfortable truth about postgraduate work permits. A postgraduate work permit, hereinafter I will refer to as a PGWP, it is not renewable, okay? There is no extension when it expires, it expires. So if your PGWP ends in 2026 and nothing is in place before that date, you do not magically get more time. You lose the right to work and even stay in Canada unless you apply for something else before the expiry date. And that is why planning now is not optional, it is survival. So if it is that you are waiting for a letter of advice or a nomination from MPNP, this is where many people are stuck because you're in Manitoba's system. You have an EOI profile, maybe you even have an employer, but you are still waiting for a letter of advice to apply or a nomination decision. Here's the key thing that most people misunderstand. No, you cannot get a bridging open work permit, as I've seen alluded to in other chat forums. Listen clearly, you cannot get a bridging open work permit just because you are in the MPNP pool. You only qualify for a BOWP, which is a bridging open work permit, after you have submitted your PR application to IRCC. Now, if you submit via express entry, then that AOR is pretty much almost instant to 24 hours to 48 hours. If you submit a paper-based PR application, then it can take about 8 months. Right now, I'm seeing persons waiting for a year. But that piece of information is needed for you to apply for a bridging open work permit because that's exactly what it does. Whilst you are waiting for a decision on your PR, you can apply for a bridging open work permit to bridge that gap of waiting. So if you are merely a candidate for nomination from MPNP, you are not eligible for a bridging open work permit. So if your PGWP expires before that happens, then you need another way to stay legally in Canada. Okay, you may have known or had knowledge about the Manitoba Support Letter Program. That ended on the 31st of December. So some of you remember that there was a special program in 2025 that allowed PGWP holders to get a 2-year work permit whilst they were waiting on their nomination. That program is now closed. There is no guarantee it will return. So for 2026 and persons who have their postgraduate work permit expiring this year, you must assume that there is no safety net from Manitoba anymore unless and until there is an announcement contrary to that, which there isn't at the moment. So you must protect your status yourself. So the real solution for 2026 PGWP holders, I'm sure the aim is to try and maintain your legal status. So for most people, there is now only one realistic path. A lot of persons are looking to an employer-specific LMIA work permit. Now, this means that your Manitoba employer applies for an LMIA on your behalf. Now, if approved, you use it to apply for a new closed work permit. Got that? Now, if you apply before your PGWP expires, then you are on what is called maintained status, and you can keep working legally. This is what keeps you alive in the system while you wait for your LAA or you wait for your nomination. So the question is, and you may be asking the same thing, will employers be willing to apply for an LMIA? Well, one of the biggest fears I have been hearing in different chat forums is that employers won't do LMIA. But to be clear, a lot of Manitoba employers already do LMIA. They just don't advertise it because it involves paperwork, it involves compliance, and it also involves legal responsibility. So here's the truth. If you are a trained, reliable worker, and LMIA is not charity, and you have to help make the case for your employer, believe it or not. You have to also be an advocate for yourself, right? So if you're a trained, reliable worker, LMIA is not a charity. It is a business decision because replacing you costs them recruiting fees, it costs them training time, productivity loss, mistakes from new workers. So an LMIA is often cheaper than losing a good employee. So you have to also help to make the case and advocate for yourself. So what does an LMIA really look like? In simple terms, if you already have the job, your employer applies to the Employment and Social Development Canada. They show that they could not easily find a Canadian for the role, and then if it is approved, they receive a positive LMIA. And with that, you will use that positive LMIA to apply for a new closed work permit, so you would be locked into that employer. Now, those permits are usually valid for up to 2 to 3 years, and it keeps you working legally, it keeps your MPNP file alive, and it allows you to reach nomination and PR subsequently. Now, while this is your real bridge, remember we had said that the postgraduate work permit is not renewable. So in 2026, this is what Manitoba immigration really looks like when you really think about it. If you are a PGWP holder, then if there is no temporary policy, and at this time of recording of research and there was none, then you have to start thinking about that route, having those conversations with your employer. If you want to skip this process, what can happen, which you don't want to happen, is that your status can expire before the system catches up. So if you just remain hopeful, that does not maintain your status, that does not maintain your legal paperwork to stay and work in Canada. Of course, there are some persons who will convert into a visitor or apply for a visitor record. Now, if you were working and you're relying on that income for your livelihood, then there's another problem. So if you want to maintain your status and be able to work, then this is a consideration. You might be asking, is there a cap on LMIA per year? And you may hesitate going to your employer because you don't feel they are willing, which some employers, truth be told, they are not, but you have to advocate for yourself right now, and you have to try and do everything that you can to make sure that you are maintaining legal status. So is there a cap on LMIA per year? There is no annual cap per se, but let me explain on the LMIAs. But approval depends on the employer, it also depends on the job, and it also depends on compliance. So let's quickly explore that. While there is no hard annual cap, Canada does not publish a number, for example, only X number of LMIAs allowed per year, or a quota where LMIAs suddenly run out nationwide. But there are practical limits, and this is where people get confused with it being a cap. For example, employer level limits. An employer cannot apply for unlimited foreign workers. The limits depend on the business size, it depends on the industry, the location of the business, the number of Canadians already employed. For example, Many low-wage streams are capped at 10 to 20% of the workforce being temporary foreign workers. So with that limitation, it may seem like it's a cap, but those are limitations. Now, high-wage LMIEs are more flexible, but they're also still scrutinized. So while Canada doesn't cap LMIEs, so to speak, individual employers are limited. Talk about occupation and the sector. So some occupations face higher refusal rates than others. There are some stricter advertising requirements for some sectors and then closer scrutiny. So it also, again, depends on the sector. And this changes over time based on labor shortages. So even without a cap, approval is not automatic. Another limitation may be the processing capacity, and this is the hidden bottleneck of LMIEs. LMIEs are processed by the federal government, and what this means in real life, if the volumes spike, processing slows. That's a natural reaction. If there's too much, then the processing slows, and therefore you will have delays in processing. So employers get discouraged after a time. This feels like a cap, but it's actually capacity, not policy. So I hope that makes sense. Another limitation, compliance history matters. So there are some employers with previous violations or poor records or incomplete applications, or they have been refused before, even if the job is genuine. So not every employer qualifies to use the LMIA repeatedly. So that's another limitation as well. So what happens after nomination? Once you get your MPNP nomination and you submit your application, then you qualify for a bridging open work permit. Now, if you had gone the express entry route, you would have received the AOR anywhere from an hour to up to 48 hours. If you chose to go the base route, which is the paper route, then that can see you waiting for 8 months to a year. It does take a while when you are not going through express entry. So once you qualify for a bridging open work permit, that means you are no longer tied to one employer. You can keep working while your PR is processed, and you are protected until you become a permanent resident. But you must survive long enough to reach that stage. And that is why the LMIA work permit is not optional anymore for most PGWP holders in Manitoba in 2026. Because as of this moment, February 3rd, 2026, I have not seen a temporary public policy to extend or anything put in place for persons with their PGWP expiring. Now, if your PGWP expires and you do nothing, then you will lose your right to work. You will lose your legal status. Your MPNP file becomes useless. You don't get the points for suffering quietly. Immigration is a legal process. It's not a waiting game. So if you're in Manitoba and your PGWP expires in 2026, start talking to your employer now about an LMIA. Do not wait for your LMA, do not wait for a nomination. Secure your status first, and then PR will follow.